I'm Stephanie, the Sweet Sugar Baker. Today I'm going to be testing out two different gluten-free sugar cookie recipes. So the first recipe that I have is from yourbakingbestie.com, and this recipe is very different from the other one, so it'll be interesting to see how they turn out. The second recipe that I have is Lila Loa, author Georgian Bell, and this first one does recommend chilling the dough in the freezer at least 24 hours before rolling out and baking. And the Lila Loa recipe says it does not need to be chilled and won't spread. All right, I'll go through the ingredients for both recipes, and then we'll mix up the Your Baking Bestie recipe first, and we'll mix up the Lila Loa recipe second. For the Your Baking Bestie gluten-free cutout sugar cookie recipe, this calls for 1 cup of unsalted butter chilled, which it then calls for creaming the butter, and I'm not sure how you're supposed to cream butter when it's rock hard cold out of the refrigerator, so I might just soften it a little bit in the microwave, just because I'm not sure how creamy it is going to go if it's super chilled. 1 cup of white granulated sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract, 1 egg chilled, so this is straight out of the refrigerator, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, half a teaspoon of salt, 3.5 cups of gluten-free flour, and it specifically calls for Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour, so that's what I have. Now for the Lila Loa recipe, this calls for 1 cup of unsalted butter, slightly softened, which is probably what I'm going to do for both of them, 1 1/4 cups of packed brown sugar, 3 eggs, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, half a teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, which seemed like way too much salt to me, so I only did a little more than half a teaspoon of salt. I don't like super salty cookies, so I cut the salt back a little bit on that one. And 4.5 cups of gluten-free flour, and again it calls specifically for Bob's Red Mill gluten-free 1-to-1 baking flour, so that's what we've got here. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go ahead and soften my butter a little bit so that I can cream it, because the first step of the recipe says to cream the butter and sugar until smooth. And I don't think the butter is going to cream very well if it's rock hard. So I'm going to stick this in the microwave on the defrost setting just for a few seconds to gently soften the butter before I cream it together. Okay, so I had this butter in my microwave at defrost setting, which is approximately like 50% power, and now it's soft enough that when I squeeze it, my fingers leave an indentation in the butter, and I feel like that's going to make it much easier for creaming the butter. So we're going to put our butter into our stand mixer, and we're going to add the sugar, and it says cream until smooth, about 2 minutes. And that is looking pretty smooth to me. That's about what I'm looking for. That butter looks nice and thoroughly creamed together. And I'm just going to go ahead and scrape off my beater and scrape down the sides and bottom of my bowl to make sure that everything is getting incorporated evenly here. All right, the next step is to beat in the vanilla and the egg. So I'll pour my vanilla extract in here and add in the egg. Okay, these look pretty well mixed. I'm just going to use my spatula again to scrape down the bowl and the beater. Okay, in a separate bowl, we are going to combine the flour, salt, and baking powder. So here's my flour, salt, and baking powder. Okay, now it says to add the flour mixture to the wet mixture a little bit at a time and mix until thoroughly blended. The dough should be pulling away from the bowl. So I'm going to use my spatula to add the flour in here. Okay, I added it all at once, so we'll see what happens. Okay. And I'm mixing this on a low speed, and the dough is coming together nicely. And it does look like it is starting to stick together and starting to maybe pull away from the sides of the bowl. I might turn it up to one level higher to help it out a little bit. Oh yeah, it looks like it is pulling away from the sides of the bowl now. Looking pretty good. Okay, so our dough is forming a nice solid mass here. It's just all sticking to each other very nicely. And it did pull away from the sides of the bowl, so I feel like that is a good thing. Okay, now this recipe recommends freezing the dough for at least 24 hours to soften the gluten-free flour granules. And it suggests rolling the dough out to 1/4 inch thick, which is the thickness that I have with this Ann Clark rolling pin, and that's how I usually roll my regular sugar cookie dough out too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and roll my dough out between two pieces of plastic wrap, and then I'll freeze it overnight. But that way it's already rolled out, because rolling out dough after it's been in the freezer can be hard to do because the dough is not very soft at that point. So I will say this dough is rolling out very nice and easily at this point. It feels very soft and easy to work with. Rolling it between these two pieces of plastic wrap is pretty simple to get it to the thickness I'm looking for, which is nice. Okay, so we have our first piece that's rolled out to 1/4 inch thick. And I'm just going to fold the plastic wrap up around this. And I'll stick it in my freezer overnight, since that's what the recipe recommends. Okay, all the dough is rolled out. It just took me 3 batches to roll it all out between my 2 pieces of plastic wrap. And now I'm going to stick it in the freezer overnight, and tomorrow we will cut it out and bake it and see how it turns out. Okay, now we're going to mix up our Lila Loa cookie recipe. So I went ahead and softened the butter in the microwave. And again, I used my defrost setting, which is around 50% power. I had the 2 sticks in there for about a total of 15 seconds. And the butter is nice and soft now. And we're going to cream together our butter and brown sugar. So here's our brown sugar that we'll put in here. And that is looking pretty good to me. Looks nicely combined and creamed together. So I'm going to scrape off the sides and bottom of my bowl. There is a little bit of butter that ended up along the sides that didn't get completely mixed in. So I just want to make sure that gets incorporated. Okay, next it says add the eggs, vanilla, baking powder, and salt. So we'll add our eggs first. And then we'll add in our vanilla extract, baking powder, and salt. This is not combining very well, so I'm going to stop it and scrape down the beater and the sides to try to get it to mix together better. Alright, this is better. Everything's getting more incorporated this time. Turn the speed up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to scrape down the beater and the bowl, and then our next step is to add in the flour and mix until the flour is completely incorporated and the dough holds together in a ball. Okay, I added in the flour and now we're going to mix it up. And it looks like it's already coming together in a ball pretty nicely. I'm going to turn the speed up one notch. Okay, it's not exactly coming together in one ball and pulling away from the edges, so the recipe suggests that you could add additional flour if necessary. It doesn't feel super sticky, but it is a little sticky, so I might just add a little bit more flour and see what happens. Okay, so between my two recipes, I used almost the entire bag of Bob's Red Mill flour, but I have a little bit left over, so I'm just going to go ahead and add it in. It's about half a cup that I have left here. Alright, that's all I have, so we'll see what happens with this. Alright, well you can see the dough is not coming together in one ball, but we're just going to use it like it is since I don't have any more gluten-free flour to add to it. Okay, so I got the dough out here and I put it onto a piece of plastic wrap, and I'm just going to gently knead it into kind of a ball shape. Make sure that everything is mixed together here. The dough is not terribly sticky. Like you can see, I'm able to get it into shape without anything sticking to my hands. So I guess it'll be fine. It just didn't pull away from the sides of the mixing bowl like the other recipe did, and like my regular sugar cookie recipe does. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so now this recipe also says to roll the dough out to 1/4 inch thick. So I have my 1/4 inch thick rolling pin, and I'm just going to separate the dough out into smaller segments and roll it between two pieces of plastic wrap. Okay, for this recipe, we need to preheat the oven to 375 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm going to get my cookie sheet and line it with parchment paper and get my cookie cutters so I'm ready to cut out the shapes and bake them. Okay, I have my cookies ready to bake. I'm going to stick them in the oven for 7 minutes. And I don't need the rest of my dough right now, so I'm going to roll it out to 1/4 inch thick and freeze it for later. Okay, our Lila Loa cookies are finished baking. They came out of the oven. They look pretty. They definitely did a nice job of keeping their shape and not spreading. And I'm just going to package these up in an airtight container until tomorrow when I make the other recipe and when I bake the other cookies, I mean. And then that way we can do a taste test between the two of them. Okay, I'm back, and I took my cookie dough out of the freezer. This is the Your Baking Bestie cookie dough, which I froze yesterday, and it's been in the freezer overnight. It is hard as a rock, and so it's not quite ready for me to cut it out and put it in the oven yet, but I'm just going to let it sit out here at room temperature for maybe about 10 minutes, and hopefully that'll soften it up enough that I can cut some circles out of it and put it on my parchment lined baking sheets and bake it. I am going to go ahead and preheat my oven to 350 degrees while I'm waiting for the cookie dough to come to soften up a little bit. So I'll check back in just a few minutes. Okay, my oven is preheated to 350 and I've let the cookie dough sit out at room temperature for a while. It's still pretty cold, but I think we'll be able to use our cookie cutter to cut out our shapes at this point. Okay, my cookies are cut out and I'm going to put these in the oven at 350 for 7 to 8 minutes. The cookies were fine to punch out while the dough was still pretty cold. The rest of the dough is going to need to sit out at room temperature for a little bit longer to soften enough so that I can roll it back into a nice ball to re-roll the scraps and make more cookies with it. Okay, I'm back. I finished baking both recipes. I finished baking the gluten-free Lila Loa sugar cookies and the gluten-free Your Baking Bestie cookies, and I brought my husband to help me taste test. Okay, so the first one we're going to taste test is the Lila Loa. They both ended up looking very similar. They both kept their shape really nicely and didn't spread. The Your Baking Bestie cookies ended up with a little bit of a crackly finish on the top of them, and the Lila Loas are perfectly smooth on the top, but that's the only real difference looks-wise. All right, so let's taste the Lila Loa first. I mean, they're gluten-free.
Yeah.
They're okay.
Okay.
All right.
Kind of dry.
Yeah, definitely kind of dry. Okay, now we'll taste the Your Baking Bestie. I think I like that one better.
It is better.
It has a better flavor, doesn't it?
The first bite is definitely it's better. I mean, it's still dry at the end, but it tastes a lot better. The other one is not good.
Yeah, this is it has more of a real cookie flavor and texture to it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Lila Loa, I mean, it just doesn't have much flavor at all. It's very dry. The after texture is very dusty feeling. It's not It's not bad as far as a gluten-free cookie goes, but I would say that these are actually pretty good.
They're good. No, they are.
No? They have a little bit more moistness to them, little bit more chewiness, and definitely less of the dry, dusty flavor and texture. All right, so we have a clear winner. The Your Baking Bestie gluten-free cutout cookies are the favorite out of the two. Thank you for your assistance.
Great job.
Thank you.